Hello everyone. Please tell me, which city are you listening from? What time is it there? It was one of those early evenings, when the sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a soft violet, the city bathed in that strange light between day and night. I had been walking for a while, just trying to clear my mind. The day had been long, full of small frustrations that had left me feeling like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. So, a walk was exactly what I needed, or so I thought. I turned onto a quiet street, one that wasn't far from home, but the familiarity of it always brought me a sense of peace. The houses on this street were all old, but well maintained, their lawns neatly trimmed, the air fragrant with the scent of jasmine from a neighbor's garden. The sidewalks were empty, as usual for this time of evening. I walked slowly, letting my mind wander as I focused on the rhythm of my steps. The streetlights flickered to life as the sky darkened, casting long shadows across the pavement. The world felt peaceful, like I could just keep walking and forget everything for a while. But as I approached the corner, I saw them, a family mother, father, and two children walking down the sidewalk ahead of me. They were just another family out for an evening stroll, a familiar sight in the neighborhood. The parents were talking to each other, their voices low and indistinct. The children were walking a little ahead, a boy and a girl, laughing as they chased each other. The scene looked normal. Nothing out of the ordinary, except something was wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. They looked like a typical family, dressed casually, strolling along just like anyone else. But as I got closer, I noticed something strange. There was no sign of any shadows. Not one of them cast a shadow. I stopped dead in my tracks. The evening light was perfect for casting long shadows, the kind that stretch across the pavement and pool around your feet. But this family who looked so ordinary, so real, didn't cast a single shadow. The light from the streetlights should have been behind them, creating dark silhouettes on the sidewalk, but there was nothing. Not even the faintest outline of their bodies on the ground. I blinked, trying to make sense of it, but when I looked closer, I realized the shadows weren't missing, they were just wrong. The light was there, the same as always, but they weren't reflecting it. They were walking in the light, and yet nothing about them reached the pavement. The sidewalk beneath their feet was clear, untouched by the usual markings of the world around them. My heart began to race, but I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was the angle of the light, or the odd way the streetlights were positioned. Maybe I was just tired. I took another step forward, but I couldn't look away from them. I was drawn to the family in a way I didn't understand. As I got closer, the unease grew. The silence of the street, the absence of their shadows, was overwhelming. My eyes kept darting between them and the pavement beneath their feet, as if expecting something to change. But it didn't. The family didn't notice me. They just kept walking, the children laughing, the parents engaged in their quiet conversation. But the more I watched, the more I realized that they were walking in a world that didn't feel right. The way the light played around them, how it seemed to bypass them entirely, as if they were somehow outside the natural laws of the world. It was wrong. The absence of shadows was too much. It felt like they weren't real. I started walking again, this time more quickly, trying to put distance between myself and the strange family. But no matter how fast I moved, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. I glanced over my shoulder, but they were still there, moving at the same pace. Too far away now for me to make out their features clearly. Then, as I reached the next intersection, something even stranger happened. I stopped at the crosswalk, waiting for the light to change, but when I looked up, the family was standing at the corner as well. They had somehow caught up with me, but they weren't walking. They were just standing there, facing me, perfectly still. I swallowed, my pulse quickening. They hadn't been there when I turned the corner. They hadn't been that close. But now, they were just standing there, staring at me, their faces blank, their eyes too still, too unblinking. I could feel them watching me, though they hadn't moved a muscle. I looked around, no one else was in sight. The street was empty. Save for the odd hum of the streetlights and the faint sound of wind rustling the leaves in the trees. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and started walking again, faster this time, desperate to get away. But when I glanced back over my shoulder, they were still there, still standing in place. And then, as I turned another corner, I saw them. Again, just ahead of me. This time, they were closer. The family was standing in front of a building, a house that I had never seen before. I didn't remember this house. It was old, dilapidated, the windows dark, the door cracked open just slightly. The family was still staring at me, their faces frozen, their eyes unblinking. I turned to leave, but when I glanced at the ground, I saw it. There were no shadows on the ground. Not a single shadow. The light from the street lamp above me should have cast anything. But the family was standing in a patch of perfect stillness, the light playing around them but never touching the ground. The pavement under their feet was empty, untouched by light or dark. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. It felt like the world was spinning, like I was caught in a dream that I couldn't escape. And then, as I took a step back, I heard something. A voice. It wasn't coming from any of them. It wasn't coming from anywhere at all. But I heard it clearly, deep in my mind. Don't look away. Stay with us. The voice wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But I felt it. It was inside my head, pulling at me, making my legs freeze in place. I looked at the family, their faces expressionless, their eyes locked onto mine, and I felt an overwhelming pull. I turned, walked faster. But no matter what I did, no matter how quickly I moved, they were always just ahead of me, staring, watching, and every time I looked, the shadows were gone. The city felt different that evening, and I couldn't put my finger on why. The air was thick with humidity, the kind of summer evening that seems to press down on everything, making each breath feel heavier than the last. I was walking home from work, a familiar route that I had taken countless times before, but tonight, something felt off. Maybe it was the oppressive quiet that had settled over the street, or the way the shadows seemed to stretch longer than usual. Whatever it was, I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't entirely alone. I turned down the usual alley to cut across to the next block. The alley was narrow, lined with tall buildings, the kind that made you feel like you were walking through a tunnel of concrete and glass. It was silent, the only sound being the faint hum of distant traffic, the rustle of leaves from the trees lining the sidewalk. The city's heartbeat, I suppose. But tonight, it was too quiet, almost suffocating. I paused for a moment, pulling my phone from my pocket to check the time. I was running a little later than usual, but I wasn't in a hurry. The soft buzz of the city, the distant murmur of voices, kept me distracted. I put the phone away, letting my feet guide me as I walked the last stretch of the alley. Then I heard it, a voice. It was faint at first, like a whisper, a sound carried on the breeze, but it was clear enough for me to catch the words, "Hey." I stopped, looking around. My heart skipped a beat. There was no one on the street, no one in the alley. Just the usual silence, the same empty scene. My eyes darted upward, scanning the rooftops of the surrounding buildings, but there was no one there. The rooftops were empty, nothing but the shadows stretching across the dull gray concrete. I shook my head, convinced that I had imagined it. Maybe it was the wind, the sound carried from somewhere else, but the voice had felt too real, too close. And then, as if the universe was playing a cruel joke on me, I heard it again. "Hey, it's me." It was clearer this time, the voice unmistakable, and it sounded so familiar. My stomach twisted. I didn't know why, but the voice unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. I felt like I should recognize it, like it should be comforting, but I didn't recognize it at all. I stepped forward, my mind racing. The voice had come from the rooftop, from one of the buildings I had just passed. I looked up again, scanning the roof lines, trying to make sense of what I was hearing, but all I could see were the dim outlines of the buildings, the occasional flicker of lights in the windows above. The street was still empty. No one was standing there. And yet, the voice called out to me again, louder this time, as if it were right above me. "It's me. You know me." I froze. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath shallow. The voice was close to close. I knew it wasn't just the wind. It wasn't a random sound carried from a distant rooftop. This voice, this whisper, was aimed directly at me. I could feel it, like someone was speaking directly into my ear, even though there was no one standing there. The voice seemed to hang in the air, waiting for me to respond, waiting for me to acknowledge it. But I couldn't. My legs felt heavy, like they were anchored to the ground. I stood there, rooted to the spot, trying to shake off the growing unease that had settled in my chest. I slowly began to back away, my eyes still fixed on the rooftop. My mind told me I was just being paranoid, that this was all some trick my senses were playing on me. I should turn around, keep walking, pretend like nothing had happened. But then, something shifted. I heard a sound from above, a scrape, a slight shift in the air. I looked up again, and for the briefest of moments, I saw a figure, a shadow. It was fleeting, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared, but I had seen it. Something was up there, standing on the edge of the roof, just out of sight. Before I could process what I had just seen, the voice came again, but this time, it wasn't a whisper. It was a clear, unmistakable call, like someone shouting my name from the roof. "It's you. You have to come up. It's me. Please." My heart skipped a beat, the blood rushing to my ears. The voice, it sounded like someone I knew. Someone I hadn't seen in years. It was impossible. It couldn't be. But the familiarity of it, the way it seemed to pull at something deep inside me, made me want to turn, to climb up to the rooftop and see. I stepped closer, my mind a jumble of confusion and fear. I wasn't sure what I was doing, but I knew one thing: I needed to look. I needed to see if the voice, the one that sounded so much like her, was real. But the moment I took a step forward, the world around me seemed to shift. The air grew colder. The streetlights flickered, the light dimming before returning to their usual brightness. My breath came out in small, visible puffs, and the hum of the city seemed to fade into an eerie, suffocating silence. The road ahead of me stretched out, longer than it should have, the shadows stretching unnaturally across the pavement. I looked up at the rooftop again, but now there was no sign of anyone, no shadow, no movement, just the rooftop, empty and still. I stopped, my body frozen in place. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. The voice, it wasn't coming from the rooftop anymore. It was coming from behind me. I turned quickly, my heart racing, but the street was empty. There was no one behind me. I stood there, my head spinning, my mind racing to make sense of everything. Voice, it couldn't have come from behind me. There was no one there, but the feeling in my chest told me otherwise. I could feel it, like a presence, lingering just out of sight. I looked back at the building. The lights flickered again, and for a brief moment, the figure on the rooftop appeared once more. But this time, it was clearer. A woman. She stood there, her face hidden in shadow, but her posture familiar, like someone I had known long ago. But the moment I took a step forward, she vanished again. I stumbled back, heart racing, as the silence of the street pressed in around me. The figure was gone. The voice had stopped. The air was still. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that the whole world had shifted in that moment. I turned to leave, but the moment I moved, the voice came again, now. Unmistakably clear, as though it was right next to me. Don't leave me, please. I froze. The voice wasn't coming from behind me anymore. It was coming from everywhere. The rooftops, the shadows, the very air around me. It was all around me. But when I looked up, the rooftops were empty. The street was empty. And the city had gone completely still. It had been a long day, the kind where everything seemed to drag on, like time itself was slipping through my fingers, too slow and heavy to bear. I had stayed late at work, then run errands, and by the time I finally found myself walking home, the world outside felt different. The city was quieter now, the streets darker, but there was a calm to the evening that I welcomed. I walked through the familiar streets, the ones I had walked 1,000 times before, the ones that felt like they were imprinted in my memory. The buildings towered on either side of me, the sidewalk cracked in places, litter fluttering across the pavement as the wind picked up. It was almost peaceful, but there was something off about it tonight, something I couldn't put my finger on. The streetlights flickered as I passed them, but that wasn't unusual. The old bulbs in this neighborhood were temperamental. Sometimes, they'd blink on and off, like they were trying to decide whether they should be working or not. I'd seen it happen before, a glitch in the otherwise predictable rhythm of the world. But tonight, as I walked, the flickering felt different. The first time it happened, I didn't think much of it. I passed under one of the streetlights, and it flickered briefly, just a subtle blink. I stopped for a moment, watching it as it steadied, the yellow glow returning to its usual flicker. No big deal, I thought. Just the usual thing. But then, as I kept walking, it happened again. I passed another streetlight, and as my shadow passed beneath it, the light blinked flickered just like the first one had. The timing was strange. Almost like it was reacting to my presence. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Maybe it was my tired mind playing tricks on me. Maybe it was just my imagination. But as I walked, I couldn't help but notice that it wasn't just a random flicker. Every time I passed a streetlight, it happened. It flickered. Blinked like it was waiting for me to pass under it. I quickened my pace, trying to shake off the feeling that was creeping up my spine. But the further I walked, the more I realized it wasn't just random. It wasn't just a malfunction. It was happening with me. I glanced up at the next streetlight ahead of me. As I walked under it, the light flickered again. This time, it was a little more pronounced, a little more noticeable. The light sputtered out, then came back on. It wasn't like it had just failed for a second. It was deliberate. It was like the light was waiting for me to pass beneath it, like it was reacting to my presence. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked back at the light I had just passed under. It was glowing steadily, as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the sensation that the flickering had been too timed, too deliberate, as if it had been waiting for me. I stood there for a moment, staring at the light. The street was eerily quiet now, the distant sounds of the city fading behind me. The streetlights ahead of me continued to glow, steady, normal, as if nothing had changed. But I couldn't let go of the feeling that something had changed. I took a few more steps forward, my footsteps too loud in the quiet of the night. I walked under another streetlight. This one flickered too, but only when I reached it. It was as if the moment I came close, it flickered. Just for a second. Just long enough to make me stop. I was sure now. The lights weren't malfunctioning. They were responding to me. I stood still for a moment, my mind racing. My breath was shallow, anxiety creeping up in my chest. I felt like I was losing control of something small and insignificant, but so noticeable now that it felt wrong. I turned back. The street was long, but I could still see the lights in the distance, their steady, consistent glow. I began to walk back the way I came, watching every streetlight carefully, waiting to see if it would happen again. And it did. Every time I passed a light, it flickered. It wasn't a big flicker, but it was enough to make me stop and question myself. Each light seemed to flicker in the same rhythm as I passed beneath it, like they were all waiting for me. I couldn't explain why, but it felt like they were reacting to my every step. I began to walk faster, the unease in my stomach growing with every flicker. The lights weren't malfunctioning. The lights were waiting for me. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. And that's when I heard it. A sound faint at first, like a low hum or a buzz. But it wasn't the sound of the lights. It was something different, something coming from the shadows, from the street ahead. I stopped again, my heart pounding. I turned toward the sound, straining to hear it, but it was too faint, just a whisper on the wind. I looked back at the streetlights again. They were still flickering in sequence, each one reacting to my presence, each one waiting for me. The hum grew louder. I couldn't take it anymore. I broke into a run, my feet pounding on the pavement, the sound of my footsteps swallowed by the silence of the night. I couldn't look behind me. I couldn't stop to see what was following me, but I could feel it. I could feel the eyes of the streetlights on me, feel their flickering gaze tracking my every movement. And then I reached the corner of the street. I was almost home. I looked back one last time, but this time, the streetlights weren't flickering. They were glowing steadily, silently, watching me. I paused, trying to catch my breath, my chest heaving. The street was quiet again. Still, the hum had stopped. The lights had stopped flickering. But as I looked down the street, I realized something even more terrifying. The lights behind me, they were still flickering. And they weren't supposed to be. It was a cold, quiet afternoon when I decided to take a walk through the city. I didn't have any particular destination in mind, just a vague need to escape the clutter of my apartment and the buzz of my usual routine. The streets were quieter than I had expected, the usual hum of the city muted by the overcast sky. The distant rumble of traffic blending into the soft rustling of trees in the park. I wandered aimlessly, taking turns without thinking, until I ended up on a familiar street, one that led me to the old park bench by the fountain. It was a place I'd passed by countless times before, but had never really stopped to appreciate. Today, however, something about it drew me in. I sat down, letting out a deep breath, feeling the weight of the day slowly lift from my shoulders. The air was crisp, and despite the chill, there was a certain calm to the park that made me want to stay a little longer. I looked around, taking in the peaceful stillness of the surroundings. The park empty, except for a few scattered pigeons pecking at the ground. It was then that I noticed something strange. A small, folded piece of paper lay on the bench beside me, half hidden beneath a layer of fallen leaves. I picked it up out of curiosity, wondering who might have left it there. It wasn't a typical letter or note, it was a photograph, folded neatly in half. I stared at it for a moment, confused. As I carefully unfolded the image, I froze. The photo was an old black and white image of a person sitting on this very bench. It was me. I was sitting on the same park bench, my posture the same as I remembered it from countless afternoons spent resting here. The photograph had been taken from behind me, so I couldn't see my face, but the figure was unmistakable. The clothing I was wearing matched what I had on when I'd taken that walk years ago. I could even tell from the way I was sitting, the way my arms were positioned, everything was identical. But that wasn't what made my heart skip a beat. What unsettled me more than anything was the detail in the background. The park, the bench, the way the trees were arranged, the same trees I had passed under just moments ago. It was too familiar, too exact. I turned the photo over, my fingers trembling slightly, expecting to find a note or a date, but there was nothing. No explanation. No caption, just the old, faded image of me, sitting on the bench, in a time I couldn't place. I looked around the park again, half expecting to see someone watching me. But the bench was empty. The path was empty. The trees stood silent. The distant hum of the city was the only sound breaking the stillness. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. Had someone been here before? Had I sat on this bench years ago without realizing it? No, that didn't make sense. I had no memory of it. I had never seen this photo before, but the image in my hands felt so familiar, as though it had come from a time I had somehow forgotten. I stood up, the cold air hitting me like a jolt, and I walked away from the bench. My steps felt heavier now, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. I kept glancing back at the park, half expecting to see someone else sitting there, watching me. But there was nothing. Just the same empty bench, the same peaceful park, the same unnerving silence. I tried to shake off the feeling that was creeping up my spine. But the image of that photograph, the photograph of me, kept replaying in my mind. I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe it was a picture someone else had taken of a random person who looked like me. Maybe it was an old photo from the past, left behind by accident. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. I found myself walking faster, as if I could outrun the confusion swirling in my head. I turned down a different street, hoping to clear my thoughts, but the memory of the photo clung to me. The image was burned into my mind, and I couldn't escape it. It wasn't until I reached a small cafe a few blocks away that I allowed myself to stop and breathe. I ordered a coffee, my hands still shaking slightly as I cupped the warm mug. I sat by the window, staring out at the street, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what I had seen. But as I looked out the window, something caught my eye. A person, walking by outside. Their figure was familiar, but I couldn't place it. As they passed by the cafe, I saw them glance in through the window, just for a second, their eyes catching mine. It was me. I couldn't breathe. The person walking outside, the one I had just seen passing by it, was me. The same posture, the same expression, the same clothes. It was me, but it wasn't me. It was as if I had seen myself, someone who had walked by years ago, someone who had crossed my path without me ever knowing. I pushed myself up from the table, my legs unsteady, my heart pounding. One had to get out of there. I couldn't sit there anymore. I needed to go home. I needed to forget this strange encounter, the photo, the eerie feeling that something was happening just beyond my grasp. I rushed out of the cafe, my breath coming in shallow bursts, and I started walking aimlessly, desperately trying to get away from the sensation of being watched. My footsteps echoed through the empty street as I walked, but the feeling of déjà vu grew stronger with every step. I turned down another street, a familiar one I had walked many times. But as I did, I saw it. The same bench, the same park. And in the distance, sitting there, was a figure. It was me. I stood frozen in place, my heart hammering in my chest, and watched as the figure, the person I had seen in the photos, on the bench. They were wearing the same clothes I had worn that day, the same posture, the same stillness. They were waiting, but for what? I couldn't tell. The streetlights flickered above me, and I felt the world shift. The ground beneath my feet feeling like it was bending in ways it shouldn't. My reflection in the shop window across the street felt distorted, too, like I was looking at a different version of myself, one who had never walked this street, one who had never seen that photograph. I started walking again, quicker this time, my steps heavy as I passed the park, but I couldn't look away. The figure on the bench was still there, still waiting, and the worst part, they were waiting for me. The evening was cool, a soft breeze brushing through the streets, carrying with it the distant hum of city life. I had just left the office, my thoughts preoccupied with the usual worries of the day, mails, tasks, the mounting pressure of responsibilities. The city was quiet at this hour, the usual rush of commuters winding down, The streets less crowded, more open. It was the perfect kind of evening to clear my head. I was walking toward the crosswalk that would take me to the next block, not in any particular hurry, just moving at my own pace, allowing the quiet to settle in. The streetlights above me flickered, casting soft pools of light on the pavement. The cars passed by lazily, their headlights creating faint streaks of motion in the dim light. I wasn't paying much attention, just lost in the rhythm of my steps, the familiar pattern of the city surrounding me. And then, just before I reached the crosswalk, I saw her. She was standing there, waiting, as if she had been there the whole time. At first, I didn't think much of it, just another pedestrian, waiting for the light to change, like so many others on the street. She was standing on the corner, a few feet away from me, her back to the light, her face hidden in the shadow of her hood. But as I got closer, something about her presence caught my attention. She was too still, as if she were frozen in place, waiting for something. She didn't look around, didn't fidget, didn't adjust her stance the way most people do when they're waiting. She just stood there, perfectly still, her posture rigid, like someone waiting for a moment that wasn't quite arriving. It made me uneasy, but I couldn't explain why. I found myself glancing over at her a few more times as I waited for the light to change. There was something about her that seemed familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. The way she stood, the stillness in her presence, it felt wrong, like she didn't belong there, like she didn't fit the normal rhythm of the city. Then, the light changed. The crosswalk light flickered on, the usual green glow lighting up the street, signaling that it was safe to cross. I took a step forward, moving toward the other side of the street, but when I looked back to the woman, she was still standing there, as still as before. The strange thing was, she hadn't moved at all, not even an inch. I stopped, a wave of confusion washing over me. Why hadn't she moved? The light had changed. People were starting to cross the street, walking toward their destinations, but she was still standing there, waiting. I didn't know why, but something in me urged me to move closer, to get a better look. I walked a few steps toward her, my feet feeling heavy with an unexplained tension. That's when it happened. The light changed again, this time to red, signaling for pedestrians to stop. And as I looked back, I saw her disappear. It wasn't like she walked away, or turned around to leave. No, it was as though she had just vanished into thin air, her form dissolving into the shadows of the street corner, leaving nothing but empty space where she had been standing. I froze. I blinked, thinking maybe I had imagined it, but no. She was simply gone, as if she had never been there. The people around me were still walking, but they didn't seem to notice anything unusual. They just continued their way, oblivious to the strange disappearance that had just happened in front of me. I stood there, feeling rooted to the spot, a chill creeping up my spine. I looked around, hoping for some kind of explanation, but the street was as normal as ever. The cars were still passing by, the lights above me flickered in their usual rhythm. The world around me continued, but there was a weight in the air now, a subtle sense that something was wrong. I stood at the crosswalk for a long time, unsure of what to do. My heart was beating a little faster now, my mind racing to make sense of what had just happened. I had seen her, she had been there, right in front of me. I wasn't imagining it, but now, she was gone. and no one else seemed to care. I turned away, feeling the unease settle into my bones. I kept walking, trying to shake off the feeling, but the thought of her disappearance lingered, gnawing at me. I walked faster, needing to put distance between myself and the strange encounter, but every step felt heavier. The more I walked, the more the city felt like it was closing in on me, as if the walls were pressing in, making it harder to breathe. And that's when I heard it. A soft voice. It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough for me to hear, even above the noise of the city. It was soft, almost a whisper, but it felt like it was coming from inside my head. Don't turn around. I froze in my tracks. The voice felt wrong. It wasn't like a voice I had ever heard before, and yet it felt familiar in a way I couldn't explain. My body tensed, my instincts screaming at me to move, to run, to get away from whatever was happening. But I couldn't. I stood there, paralyzed, and before I could think to react, I heard the voice again, only this time it was closer. As if the person was right behind me, whispering into my ear. You saw me. Don't turn around. My heart pounded in my chest as I took a step forward, then another. But every part of me felt like I was being watched. The street was empty. Now, the other pedestrians long gone, leaving only the distant sounds of traffic and the harsh buzz of streetlights above. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I kept walking, the feeling of being followed growing stronger, the voice echoing in my mind like a warning. Don't look back. I quickened my pace, almost running now, but no matter how fast I walked, no matter how far I went, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still there watching me, waiting for me to make the wrong move. I could still hear her voice, soft, distant, yet closer than before. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the voice stopped. The world around me returned to normal, or so it seemed. The street was quiet, the wind gentle against my skin. I looked back, expecting to see anything, but the street behind me was empty. There was nothing there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I turned back around and kept walking, but the moment I passed the next crosswalk, I froze again. The same spot, the same street corner. The woman was standing there again, but this time, she wasn't waiting. This time, she was watching me, and I was left standing, trapped between the crosswalks, with no way out. I've always found something oddly calming about the subway. The steady rumble of the tracks beneath, the rhythmic whoosh of the doors opening and closing, the feeling of being cradled between the city's underground veins. After a long day, I usually took the same train, the one that ran along the same path, from my office to my apartment. I'd sit by the window, watch the stations go by, and let my mind wander as the train moved along its dark tracks. But that night, something was different. I had just finished a long shift at work, and, as usual, I boarded the train at the same time, heading home. It wasn't late, not too crowded. People were scattered throughout the car, some reading, some staring blankly ahead, others listening to music with their eyes closed. I found my usual seat near the window, letting out a sigh of relief as the doors closed behind me, sealing off the noise of the city. The train started its usual journey, the familiar clanking and screeching of the wheels against the rails blending into the background. I glanced around at the other passengers, trying to focus on something outside the window. but the train was unusually quiet tonight. I didn't hear any conversations, no muffled voices of people on their phones, no faint laughter or rustling of bags. Just the sound of the train itself. I looked up. The car was still mostly full, people scattered in various seats, staring at their phones or simply lost in their own thoughts. But then I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The seats across from me, which should have been empty, were taken. But not by people. There were shadows sitting there. At first, I thought I was just tired, my mind playing tricks on me, but as the train jerked to a stop, I blinked and looked again. The seats were filled, as if occupied by invisible bodies. I could see the subtle indentations on the fabric, the weight of something heavy resting in the seat, but there was nothing there. No shape, no form, no actual passengers, just empty space, but it looked like someone was sitting. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, trying to convince myself that it was a trick of the light or my exhaustion. But the more I looked, the more it became undeniable. Someone or something was sitting in those seats. I could almost feel the weight pressing into the fabric, the subtle shift of air around the empty spaces. The train started moving again, the squealing of the wheels breaking the silence. I glanced around at the other passengers. No one else seemed to notice. They were all absorbed in their own little worlds, as if nothing was unusual. But I couldn't take my eyes off the empty seats. The shadows there seemed to grow more defined as the train passed through the dark tunnels. I could see them more clearly now, the outlines of heads, the soft curve of shoulders. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. My heart began to race as I realized that there was no one there. But somehow, there was something there. A presence. A weight that made the air feel thicker, heavier. The train jerked again as it slowed down, and the car seemed to vibrate with a low hum. I felt my breath quicken, but when I looked around at the other passengers, they hadn't moved. They were still staring ahead or looking down at their phones, oblivious to the growing sense of dread that was overtaking me. It was then that I noticed something else. The lights above flickered. For a brief moment, the entire car plunged into darkness. But when they flickered back on, the shadows in the seats were still there, more pronounced now, as if they had somehow shifted closer to me. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, louder now, and the quiet murmur of the train seemed to echo in the car, a soundless scream in the air. I looked around, desperate for someone else to notice, but no one did. Everyone seemed too absorbed in their own space, too lost in their own little bubble, to notice that something was wrong. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up abruptly, the motion startling me as much as the people around me. I quickly moved to the next car, my footsteps loud in the silence. I needed to get away from those seats, from those shadows. I passed through the door to the next car, but what I saw made my heart stop. The car was the same. The same shadows were there, sitting in the same seats. It was as though the seats were waiting. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like they had been waiting for me. The train, the passengers, everything seemed suspended, held in place by whatever unseen force filled those seats. I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking. I turned to leave, to escape, but as I reached the door, I saw something that made me freeze. In the reflection of the train window, I saw myself. But I wasn't alone. There, in the reflection, sitting. Beside me was an empty figure, a shadow sitting in the seat next to mine. I could see the subtle outline of it, the same empty shape that had been haunting the other seats. But now it was beside me. With me, I jerked my gaze away from the reflection, my heart hammering in my chest. But when I turned back, I saw it again sitting right next to me. The seat was still empty, but the figure was there, staring at me, the shadow of a person who wasn't there. I couldn't look away. My breath caught in my throat. The figure's presence felt so close, so real, even though there was nothing there. I could feel its gaze, heavy and unblinking. The train slowed down again, and I could see the station approaching. My hand was trembling as I reached for the door handle. I wanted to leave, to escape whatever this was. But when the doors opened, I hesitated. I could feel the air shift around me. The shadow beside me didn't move. It didn't shift, but I could feel it. I could feel it waiting, as if it were waiting for something to happen, waiting for me to make a choice. Without thinking, I stepped off the train, into the station. I didn't look back. The doors closed behind me with a soft whoosh, and the train rumbled away into the dark tunnel. The familiar sounds of the station filled the air, the low murmur of the crowd, the distant hum of the escalators. But the shadow, it was still with me. I could feel it, just behind me, pressing in on the edges of my vision. I glanced nervously at the train track, at the people around me, but no one seemed to notice. No one seemed to see what I had seen. The shadow had followed me, and I had no idea where it would take me next. It was one of those nights when everything feels familiar but distant, like the world is moving just a little too fast, and you're stuck in the spaces between. I had spent the evening at a cafe, not particularly enjoying myself, but the time had passed, and I was ready to go home. The city felt different at this hour, emptier, quieter. The streets soaked in the dim orange light from the street lamps, casting long shadows along the pavement. I wasn't in a hurry. The walk home would only take 20 minutes, and it was peaceful at this time of night. Most people had already gone inside, and the usual hum of the city had faded to a quiet murmur in the background. I took a left down an old, narrow street I often walked when I wanted to avoid the bustle of the main road. It was quieter here, lined with old brick buildings and the occasional tree that seemed to stretch its bare branches toward the sky. The streetlights flickered intermittently, and the world seemed to be caught between the noise of the day and the silence of the night. I was lost in my thoughts when I noticed her. At first I thought she was just another person walking home, but as I looked closer, something about her seemed off. She was ahead of me, walking at a steady pace down the street, but there was no one else around. The street was empty, the quiet only broken by the distant sound of traffic and the soft rustling of leaves. I didn't think much of it at first. I've always been someone who notices people, maybe a little too much. But then, the longer I walked, the more I found myself fixated on her. She was just walking ahead of me, a woman dressed in a dark coat, her hair pulled back into a loose ponytail. She didn't look remarkable in any way, but the way she walked, too steady, too composed for a late evening like this, was unsettling. I thought I would pass her soon enough, but she never slowed down. The distance between us remained the same, no matter how fast or slow I walked. She stayed ahead, her back turned to me, her steps echoing softly in the stillness of the night. And then, without really thinking about it, I began to follow her. There was no reason for it. I wasn't in a rush, and I didn't need to go that way. But my feet just moved on their own, following her down the darkened street. She never looked back, never seemed to notice me trailing behind. She just kept walking at that same steady pace, her footsteps matching the rhythm of mine, as if we were walking the same path together. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease creeping up my spine. She was just a woman walking home. It wasn't strange, wasn't unusual, but the longer I followed her, the more disconnected from everything else I felt. The city seemed to fade behind me, the streets empty, the buildings fading into a blur of shadows. I turned a corner, and she did the same. I followed another turn, and she did the same. It was as if she knew exactly where I was, as if she was leading me down this path that I couldn't quite understand. The silence between us stretched on. I couldn't even hear the sound of my own breathing, just the steady rhythm of her footsteps ahead of me. It was all so quiet, so unreal. The kind of silence that makes you feel like the world has stopped and you're the only one still moving. Finally, I spoke, my voice soft, unsure of why I was speaking at all. "Excuse me," I called, my words swallowed by the emptiness of the street. "Are you lost?" She didn't turn, didn't acknowledge me at all. I took another step forward, still following her, but now there was something more pressing in my chest, a gnawing feeling that I couldn't place. Why wasn't she turning around? I quickened my pace, closing the distance between us. Just a few more steps, and I would be right behind her. I reached out, almost instinctively, my hand reaching for her shoulder. But just as my fingers were about to touch her coat, she did something I wasn't prepared for. She stopped. The sudden stillness in the air almost knocked the breath from my lungs. For a split second, I thought she was going to turn to face me. But she didn't. She just stood there, her back still to me, the faint light from the street lamp casting long shadows around her. I stood there, my hand hovering just inches from her, my heart pounding in my chest. The silence stretched on, heavy and thick, and I found myself waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. I waited for her to speak, to turn, to acknowledge me, but she stayed frozen, as if the world had paused for a moment. Her stillness was so absolute, so unnatural, it was as if she were caught in time. I wanted to speak again, to ask her what was going on, but my voice failed me. It was as if the air had thickened, making it hard to breathe. And then, just as suddenly as she had stopped, she began to walk again. I didn't move at first, too. Stunned by the sudden shift, my mind was racing, trying to understand what had just happened. I couldn't stop myself. I started walking again, just a few steps behind her, my heart still hammering in my chest. I glanced at her again. Her back was still to me. She didn't turn, didn't acknowledge my presence at all. But something had changed. The air felt different, heavier, as if the world had shifted somehow. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like I was walking through a dream, each step carrying me further into something I couldn't see, something I didn't understand. I followed her for what felt like hours, my legs growing tired, my mind spinning. Each street, each corner, felt like a continuation of the one before. The world outside the path I was following seemed to blur, becoming less and less real, until it felt like it had all been swallowed up by the shadows. And then she stopped again. This time, when she stopped, there was no mistaking it. We were standing at the edge of a street I didn't recognize. The buildings, the alleyway, the signposts, everything was unfamiliar. The streetlights above flickered briefly, but I could feel it. We had reached the end of something, but I couldn't tell what. I looked at her. She was still standing there, perfectly still, and yet she felt farther away from me than ever before. I took a step forward, my feet moving on their own, but as I did, I noticed something I hadn't before. The shadows around us weren't moving. They were standing still, just like her. The world, the city, the streets, the air, it was all frozen. And I was the only one still moving. I stopped, frozen in place, and she still hadn't turned around. It was a Friday evening, the kind where the weight of the week starts to dissolve as soon as you step outside. The air was cool, with that familiar crispness of the early evening, the sky tinged with the last remnants of daylight before the night took over. I was looking forward to a quiet night, maybe grab some dinner, take a walk, and just let the rhythm of the city settle over me. But, as always, my plans had a way of twisting into something I couldn't quite understand. I was walking down a familiar street, my mind elsewhere, lost in thought, when I realized I had wandered off the main road and into a part of the city I didn't recognize. I wasn't sure when it had happened. Maybe I had taken a wrong turn. Or maybe I had just spaced out, but now I was standing on the edge of an unfamiliar block, looking at the narrow alleyways and old brick buildings that lined the street. I pulled out my phone, thinking maybe I could find my way back. I opened the map app, and the familiar grid of the city popped up. I zoomed out to get an overview, but then I noticed something strange. The map was showing streets that I had never seen before. At first, I thought it was just a glitch, some error in the app, but the more I looked at it, the more I realized that the map didn't match the city I knew. Streets were shown where there should have been none, alleys that didn't exist in real life were laid out in a neat grid. The city on the screen was different. Somehow unfamiliar, like it had rearranged itself in the few minutes I wasn't paying attention. I glanced up from my phone, expecting to see the familiar skyline, the usual row of shops and apartments that made up this part of town. But when I looked around, I felt a sudden unease. The street in front of me was quieter than I remembered, with fewer people walking by. The buildings looked older, their windows dark, and the lamps above me flickered as though they were struggling to stay lit. I typed in the name of the street I was looking for and looked at the map again. It showed the right location, but the street I was standing on seemed to veer off in the wrong direction. I should have been able to see the usual shops and buildings, but instead, I was staring down a narrow alley that I didn't recognize. Trying to shake off the strange feeling creeping over me, I decided to walk down the alley. Maybe I had just wandered a little too far, and the city was changing, adding new streets to fit the growth of the area. But the deeper I went, the more unsettling everything became. The buildings grew taller, more crowded, their walls closer together. The air felt heavier, and the streetlights buzzed ominously above me. It felt as though the world around me was shifting, bending in a way I couldn't understand. I checked the map again. The alley I was walking down didn't appear on it. There were no roads listed around me. just a blank space where the map should have shown the streets. My pulse quickened, but I tried to stay calm. Maybe the app was malfunctioning. It was late, and I hadn't eaten yet. Maybe I was just tired. I kept walking, hoping the familiar landmarks would eventually show up, hoping that I would find my bearings and the streets I recognized. But the further I walked, the more it felt like the world around me was dissolving, replaced by an endless maze of narrow alleys and unfamiliar intersections. I turned down another street, one that should have been familiar from the map hand. Found myself looking at a corner that shouldn't have existed. There was no sign for it, no street name, just the eerie sense that this place was somehow out of sync with the world. I checked the map again. The street I had just turned down didn't exist on the map anymore. There was no trace of it, no indication that the road had ever been there. I could feel a cold sweat beginning to form on the back of my neck as I walked faster. My footsteps echoed in the narrow space between the buildings, but no one else was around. The city had gone completely silent, save for the faint hum of streetlights and the rustling of leaves from somewhere in the distance. I took another turn, hoping to break free of the growing panic that was clutching at my chest. But what I found only made things worse. The map now showed a different street, one I didn't recognize at all. I couldn't see anything familiar around me. The buildings had changed again, now twisted and warped in a way that defied reason. The streets, the paths, they were all wrong. I had walked through this neighborhood hundreds of times, but none of it was the same. I tried to find a way out, but every turn led me deeper into the labyrinth. I checked the map once more, and there, at the edge of the screen, I saw something that sent a chill down my spine. The map was showing streets that weren't just new to me, they were streets that didn't even seem to belong to the same city. The names on the map were unfamiliar, almost nonsensical, and the streets themselves stretched on endlessly, leading nowhere. I tried to calm myself down, to make sense of what was happening, but the more I tried to understand, the more everything around me seemed to shift. It felt like the world was changing with every step I took, like the city itself was being erased and rewritten in real time, leaving me trapped in a space that didn't make sense. I stopped and looked around. The buildings towered above me, their windows dark and empty, casting long shadows across the street. But something was different. The street I had been walking on, the street I was walking on was gone. The path in front of me didn't match what was on the map anymore. I was standing in a place that wasn't real. I could feel my pulse thudding in my ears, my body tense with fear. The map was completely useless now, and the street I was on didn't exist. There was no way out, no way forward. And then, in the distance, I saw something move, a figure. They were walking toward me from the end of the street, their silhouette framed by the dim light of the street lamp. I couldn't make out their features, but they were moving closer, coming toward me with a steady, unhurried pace. I froze. I couldn't see their face, but the closer they got, the more the air around me thickened. It was like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something, for me. As they reached the corner where I stood, they stopped, and for the first time, I saw their face. It was my face. The city felt strangely quiet that evening. I had left work a little later than usual, and the streets, usually bustling with people on their way home, seemed emptier, quieter than I was used to. The evening sky was a pale gray, clouds hanging, thick and low, casting long shadows across the streets. I wasn't in a rush, just walking aimlessly, letting the rhythm of the city guide me. I always found that walking helped me clear my head. I passed through the usual blocks, the same old cafes, shops, and street vendors that I'd walked by 1,000 times before. The hum of the city was there, the soft murmur of distant conversations, the sound of footsteps against the pavement, and the occasional honk of a car in the distance. But then, I saw him. I first noticed him at the intersection, standing on the opposite side of the street, just before the light turned green. He was tall, dressed in a dark coat, his face partially obscured by the collar. He didn't look remarkable, at least at first, but something about him caught my attention. His presence felt odd. I couldn't explain it, but it was like he was waiting for something, or someone. He was standing still, not moving, just watching the street, his gaze distant and unblinking. I took a quick glance as I crossed the street, and as I did, I caught his eyes for a split second. They were dark, almost unnervingly so, like two bottomless pits. But just as quickly as I noticed him, the light turned green, and I was walking again, shaking off the strange feeling that had crept into my chest. I didn't think much of it at first. Just another stranger in the city, I thought. But as I walked, the nagging feeling didn't leave. It clung to me, hovering at the edge of my mind, until I couldn't shake it off. Then, I saw him again. I had crossed another block and turned down a side street, one I usually took as a shortcut home. As I rounded the corner, there he was again, standing in front of a small cafe, the same tall, dark figure, his coat now almost blending with the shadows of the street. But this time, he wasn't just standing still, he was looking directly at me. His eyes met mine, and that same unsettling chill ran through me, deep into my bones. I froze, my feet momentarily planted in place. There was something so wrong about it. It wasn't just that I had seen him before, it was the way he looked at me, like he knew me, like he was expecting me. His face was still mostly hidden by the collar of his coat, but those eyes, they felt like they could see straight through me, to some deep, hidden part of me I wasn't ready to confront. I quickly turned away, trying to push the feeling out of my head, but when I glanced back, he was gone. Disappeared, like he had melted into the shadows. I stood there for a moment, wondering if I had imagined the whole thing. It was late. I was tired, maybe I was just seeing things. But the unease lingered, pulling at me. I kept walking, trying to dismiss the thought, but as I turned down another street, I saw him again. This time, I was only a few feet away, and I felt the air around me grow heavy. He was standing under the dim light of a street lamp, his dark eyes fixed on me once again. But this time, there was something different, something I hadn't noticed before. His face. He wasn't wearing the same coat anymore. It was still dark, but this time it looked different. A strange, almost familiar fit. And his face was completely different. The features were the same, yet there was something off about them, something that didn't belong. His jawline was sharper, his nose slightly longer, but his eyes, those deep, dark eyes, were exactly the same. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. How could it be the same person? I could feel my pulse quicken, my heart pounding in my chest. I was standing frozen, my legs unwilling to move, as I stared at him. His lips parted slightly, and for a moment, I thought he might speak. But he didn't. He just stood there, watching me, waiting for something I couldn't understand. Before I could react, the light changed, and the world seemed to shift again. I blinked, and when I looked up, he was gone. Just like that. The entire street, which had seemed so full of life only moments before, felt eerily empty now. I glanced around, but there was no sign of him. He had vanished. I hurried home after that, the unease growing with every step I took. I couldn't explain what I had seen. Why did he keep appearing? Why did he look different every time? I hadn't imagined it. I knew I hadn't imagined it. The next day, I tried to forget about it. I went to work, ran errands, and kept busy, trying to push the thoughts of the stranger out of my mind. But no matter how hard I tried, the image of his face, of his different faces, kept creeping back into my thoughts. I couldn't stop thinking about him. And then, that night, I saw him again. I was walking home, taking the same route as always, but as I passed a quiet park near my building, I saw him across the street, standing under a tree, the same dark coat, the same strange posture, unmoving, watching. This time, he didn't even glance at me. His head was tilted slightly to one side, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. His features, though, were completely different from what they had been before. This time, his face was pale, almost sickly, and his eyes had an eerie glow to them, like they were reflecting the streetlights above him. His expression was blank, but his presence was heavier, more suffocating. I stopped, my feet unwilling to move, but I knew I couldn't just keep walking. I had to understand why he kept appearing, why he kept looking different every time. I had to ask someone, anyone, if they knew who he was, if they had seen him before. I crossed the street toward him, but the moment I took my first step toward the park, he vanished. I stopped in my tracks, unable to breathe for a moment. The street in front of me was empty again. No one was there. The park was silent, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. But then, I heard it. The soft sound of footsteps behind me. I turned quickly, but there was no one there. The street was empty. I was alone, but I knew I wasn't. Every time I saw him, I felt more and more like I was losing touch with something. Like the city itself was slipping through my fingers, unraveling piece by piece. And the next time I saw him, I wouldn't be able to turn away. I would have to face whatever it was he had been trying to show me. The crowd was thick, a blur of people pushing past one another, their faces caught in the soft amber glow of the streetlights. It was a Friday night, and the city was alive with the usual buzz, people heading to bars, shops closing, the faint music of street performers drifting on the breeze. The air was warm for a late autumn evening, the scent of fresh coffee mixing with the faint hint of rain in the distance. It felt like a perfect evening to be out, walking aimlessly, just taking in the energy of the city. I had just left the cafe, the warmth of the coffee still in my hands, when I saw her. She was standing near the corner, a figure in a crowd of passersby, but there was something about her that made me pause. She didn't stand out in the way someone might with bright clothes or a loud voice, but there was a certain stillness to her, as if the world around her was moving, but she was frozen in place. Her back was to me, her hair flowing down her shoulders, the dim glow of the streetlights catching the strands as they swayed gently in the breeze. For a moment, I thought maybe I recognized her, but I couldn't place her face. She had a calmness about her, a kind of serenity that made her seem almost out of place in the bustling crowd. I stared at her for a little too long, trying to figure out why she looked so familiar. And then, she turned. I felt a jolt, a sudden unease washing over me, as though I had been caught looking at something I shouldn't have. Her eyes met mine. For a brief moment, there was no smile, no recognition, just a soft, distant gaze. But as she looked at me, it was like the entire crowd faded for a split second. Time seemed to slow, the noises of the street dimming into a muffled hum, and all I could focus on was her. She turned her head back toward the street, and the moment passed. I blinked, trying to shake off the strange sensation, but something lingered, something I couldn't quite place. I didn't recognize her, not in any way that made sense. But there was something about her presence that pulled me in, something that felt familiar but distant. I tried to move on, pushing through the crowd, but for some reason, I couldn't stop thinking about her. What was it about that look? Why did I feel like I had seen her before? I walked a few more steps, but then, as I crossed the intersection, I heard it. Her voice. It wasn't loud, not a shout or a call for attention, but it was clear, distinct, like she was speaking directly to me. "You're not alone." I froze, mid-step, the words echoing in my mind. My heart raced in my chest. It wasn't a shout or a scream, just a calm, soft statement, one that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I spun around, looking for her, but the crowd was moving, flowing around me, and she was gone. I couldn't find her. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of it, but the city kept moving, people bustling around me, the noise of the streets slowly returning to its usual hum. My breath came in short bursts, my mind racing. I must have imagined it. I turned back around, but as I continued walking, I felt the same sensation building again, the feeling that I wasn't alone. The voice wasn't just a trick of the wind, or the crowd. It had been too distinct, too clear. I shook my head, trying to brush off the unease, but every few steps, I heard it again. "You're not alone." The same words, soft, like a whisper carried on the breeze. It wasn't her speaking anymore. It was just the voice, like it was lingering in the air around me, following me. But when I stopped and turned, there was no one there. I scanned the crowd, but she was gone. She was always gone. I started walking. Faster now, my heart racing in my chest, the feeling of being followed clawing at the edges of my mind. The crowd around me was getting denser, and the noise of the city grew louder, but the voice stayed with me. It wasn't a shout, it was a presence. "You're not alone." I quickened my pace, trying to push through the crowd. But no matter how fast I moved, no matter where I turned, the voice followed. It was as though it was inside my head, pulling at something deep within me, reminding me that I was being watched, that I wasn't truly alone. I ducked into a side street, away from the main thoroughfare, hoping that the noise of the city would drown out the voice. The shadows of the narrow street felt comforting, almost safe. The further I walked, the quieter the street became. The voice still echoed in my mind, but the air here was thick, filled with the quiet hum of distant traffic. I was almost relieved when I turned the corner, but then, as I looked ahead, I saw her again. She was standing at the far end of the street, just like before, silent, still, watching me. But she didn't move. And when I looked closer, I saw something that made my stomach drop. She was no longer facing me. She was facing the street, but her head had tilted slightly to the side, her expression unreadable. She stood there, still as stone, and the moment I looked at her, the voice came again. "You're not alone." I froze, every muscle in my body locked in place. The voice was so close now, it felt like she was right behind me. I turned quickly, but the street was empty. The alley was empty. The crowd had thinned, and the sounds of the city had dimmed once more. She was gone. I don't know how long I stood there, waiting for her to reappear, for the voice to call out again. But the street was silent now. No more crowds, no more shadows moving. Just the soft, distant hum of the city, the noise of the world outside, and that chilling, growing feeling that something had followed me out of that street. I finally walked away, back toward the main road, but the voice never stopped. Every step I took, every turn I made, I could hear it echoing in the back of my mind, soft, insistent. "You're not alone." And even now, as I lie in my bed, the voice still lingers. I can still hear it, drifting in the quiet of the night, waiting for me to listen again. But when I look around, there's no one there. The city was stunning at night. I had just finished a long day at work, and the evening sky was painted in deep hues of purple and orange, the first stars beginning to poke through the fading twilight. The skyscrapers around me stood like giants, their windows glowing faintly with the lights of the offices inside, the air around me thick with the low hum of the city. I was walking down the main avenue, the sidewalk bustling with people heading home, grabbing a late-night coffee, or just enjoying the evening. I was a little tired, but the cool air and the low buzz of city life always had a way of rejuvenating me. I loved the feeling of being in the heart of the city, the sense that everything was alive and moving forward. I crossed the street, heading toward the subway entrance. But as I walked past one of the tallest buildings on the block, I noticed something odd. The building's windows, big, reflective panes that stretched from the floor to the ceiling, were reflecting the street and the city around me. But something wasn't right about the reflection. It was off. I stopped walking, my feet slowing as I stared up at the glass. At first, I couldn't put my finger on it. The reflection seemed almost perfect, a mirror of the real city. The cars, the people, the sidewalk, they were all there. But then I saw it. The reflection didn't match. It wasn't just the difference of lighting or the angle. No, something in the reflection didn't belong. The street was quieter than it should have been. The cars reflected in the windows were moving slower, the people walking by were frozen in place, their movements jerky and unnatural, as if caught in some strange pause between moments. I squinted, stepping closer to the window. My own reflection looked normal, my tired eyes staring back at me, my coat loosely hanging from my shoulders. But the street outside me, the one that had been so alive just a second ago, was suddenly empty in the reflection. No one was there. I glanced around quickly, confused. But the real street was full of life. People walking, cars passing, the usual evening scene unfolding in front of me. But in the reflection of the building's windows, there was no one. Number cars, no people, nothing but an empty street. The contrast between the real world and the reflection made my stomach tighten with unease. I reached out and touched the glass, my fingers pressing against the cool surface, hoping it was just a trick of the light, a misaligned reflection caused by something on the other side of the building. But when I looked again, it was still the same. The reflection was wrong. It showed an empty street, with the occasional flicker of movement like a ghostly afterimage, a distorted version of reality. I stepped back, my heart rate picking up. I looked around at the people passing by me, but none of them seemed to notice anything unusual. They were all walking with their heads down, earbuds in, oblivious to the fact that the reflection in the building's windows didn't match what was happening in the real world. I shook my head, trying to laugh it off. It was probably just the way the glass was angled, or some trick of the light. But when I looked up again, something else caught my eye. The reflection didn't just show an empty street, it showed another city. It was subtle at first, small details that didn't belong. The buildings in the reflection were different. The architecture, while still modern, had an older feel to it, like a city from a different time. The lights on the street were dimmer, more yellow, casting shadows that seemed too long for the time of night. And the skyline, where there should have been the sharp outlines of the modern skyscrapers. There were distant, crumbling buildings, their windows dark and hollow. It was a city, yes, but not the one I knew. I felt a chill run through me. The people in the reflection weren't the same either. The figures walking on the street were distorted, their bodies too stiff, their movements too smooth. They didn't look like people from my world. They looked like shadows, like phantoms caught in a place that didn't exist. Their faces were blurred, indistinct, their forms melting into the reflection of the street, as though they didn't quite belong. I backed away from the window, my breath coming faster now. Something wasn't right. I turned and looked up at the building's facade, wondering if I was losing my mind. But there, high above me, I could still see the reflection. The reflection of a city that wasn't mine. The buildings, the streets, they didn't belong to the world around me. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't make sense of it. But I felt a sudden sense of dread, feeling that I wasn't just seeing a reflection of the city, but a glimpse into another world, one that was overlapping with mine, just out of reach. A world that was wrong. I needed to leave. I turned quickly, starting to walk toward the subway entrance again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the reflection still staring back at me, but the windows of the building were dark now. No more ghostly city. No more empty streets. Just a reflection of the real world. But the unease didn't leave me. I hurried down the stairs to the subway platform, trying to clear my head. The platform was relatively empty, the usual hum of the train tracks filling the space. I leaned against the wall, trying to calm my racing thoughts. My reflection in the subway windows was normal, but the image of the other city, the one I had seen in the building's windows, kept playing in my mind. The crumbling buildings, the empty streets, the distorted people. I shook my head again, trying to push it away. It was just my mind playing tricks. A reflection was just that, something to show you what was there, not what wasn't. But then, the train arrived. I stepped inside, relieved to leave the platform behind, but as I found a seat and looked out the window, I froze. The reflection in the train window wasn't the one I knew. It was the city again. The one with the crumbling buildings, the empty streets. I could see it clearly now, as the train moved forward, the reflection of the city's streets shifting, blending with my own. And then, just as the train began to pull out of the station, I saw something or someone in the reflection. A figure. A person standing at the corner, looking directly at me. But they weren't in the real world. They were only in the reflection. I blinked, my heart racing, but when I looked again, the figure was gone. There was no one standing at the corner. The city, both real and reflected, was empty again. I sat back in my seat, my pulse pounding. I didn't understand what was happening, but the longer I stared at the window, the more I realized something even more unsettling. The city in the reflection wasn't the one I had walked through. It wasn't my city at all. I had just finished a late shift at work, the city feeling quieter than usual as I walked through the empty streets. It was one of those nights when the world seems to blur, everything fading into the kind of dull silence that makes you feel like you're walking through a dream. The sky was overcast, the faint glow of streetlights casting long, tired shadows across the pavement. I was exhausted, my feet dragging with each step, but I needed to get home. The street was familiar, one I'd walked down countless times before. The same cracked sidewalks, the same parked cars lining the road. Everything was the same, but tonight something felt off. I was nearing the crosswalk at the corner when I saw it. The light was green, so I started walking across the street, as I had done countless times before. But just as I stepped onto the asphalt, I felt a slight shift in the air, something imperceptible but present, like a brief tug at the back of my mind. I didn't think much of it. I kept walking. But when I reached the other side of the street, I stopped, my feet suddenly frozen in place. I blinked, staring at the corner ahead of me. The street, the buildings, the streetlights, the sidewalk, everything was the same, but the sense of wrongness was unmistakable. I had crossed the street. I should be standing on the other side of the road, but I wasn't. I was back where I started. I looked around, trying to shake off the sensation, but no matter how much I moved, no matter how many steps I took, everything around me stayed the same. The crosswalk, the corner, the exact same street. It was like I hadn't moved at all. I blinked again, feeling my heart begin to race. It didn't make sense. I had crossed the street. I had taken the step. I had moved from one side to the other, and yet here I was, still standing at the same corner, the same spot I had been only moments before. The same crosswalk light was green. The same car was parked beside the curb. The same people were walking down the sidewalk. Everything was the same, yet something was wrong. I took another step forward, this time more cautiously, unsure of what to expect. But as I moved across the street once more, I felt the exact same thing, a slight shift, an unseen pull, a strange tug in the air. When I reached the other side, I stopped again, and once again I was back where I started. I stood in the middle of the crosswalk, staring at the same corner, the same street, the same streetlights that I had just walked away from. This time, I felt the weight of panic begin to settle in. I wasn't walking in circles. I wasn't walking at all. I was standing in the same spot, no matter how many steps I took. It was like the world had rearranged itself without me, and I was stuck in a loop I couldn't break. I turned around, trying to figure out what was happening, but the world around me felt wrong. The city, usually bustling with the hum of distant cars and the occasional footsteps of late-night stragglers, was silent. The usual rush of life had dissipated, leaving only the eerie quiet. No one else was on the street. I looked at my watch. Only a few minutes had passed, but time seemed to be stretching. I could still feel the tug of something beyond my understanding, a pull that was drawing me back to the same place, a place I had already crossed. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing thoughts, and crossed the street again, hoping to break whatever hold this strange loop had on me. But when I reached the other side, I found myself back on the first side again. I felt a shiver run down my spine. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I didn't know what to do. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch further than they should have. The buildings around me seemed too close now, leaning in, their windows dark and empty, watching me. The sound of my footsteps echoed on the pavement, but it was too loud in the silence. I turned around again, desperately trying to find something familiar, but nothing changed. I was stuck in this moment, this endless loop of crossing the same street, trying to get away but always ending up back where I started. A soft sound broke the silence, a distant thump, almost imperceptible, like a door slamming shut far off in the distance. But it wasn't the sound that caught my attention. It was the way the sound seemed to echo from all around me, like it was coming from every corner, every alleyway. I looked around, but there was no one else, no one in sight. The crosswalk light was still green. The cars on the street were still parked in the same spots. The same people walked by, their faces blurred, their movements too fast, as if they were out of sync with the world around them. I turned my head to look at the other side of the street, but there was no one there. I walked across the street. Once again, my mind filled with nothing but confusion and fear. I had to break the cycle. I had to get out of this loop. But as I crossed the street, the same tug in the air pulled at me, and I found myself standing in front of the same corner again. I stopped in my tracks, my breath shallow. The street, the buildings, everything felt too close now. Too alive in a way that wasn't right. The shadows stretched too far. The lights flickered in a pattern I couldn't follow. And there, on the other side of the street, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A figure, a person, standing by the corner. Not moving, not walking, just standing still, facing me. Their face was obscured by the shadow of a building, but I could feel their presence, like they were waiting for me. I took a step forward, my legs trembling, my heart pounding. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. They just stood there, watching me. And then I realized something. The figure looked familiar. It was me. The panic hit me like a wave, and for a split second, I felt like I was falling. I turned to run, but the street stretched on, impossibly long, and I felt the same tug, the same loop pulling me back to the same spot. I couldn't escape. I was trapped, in a city that wasn't mine, on a street that didn't exist, and the worst part, I didn't know if I was ever going to leave.